Welcome again to Reviews from Purgatory with J. Matt Wigand. This time around, I will be reviewing Halloween 2. It's not as good as the original, but as far as sequels go, it's better than most. So let's talk about this movie and see what they messed up and what they did right. Halloween 2 picks up where Halloween 1 left off. It starts off with the last 5 minutes of Halloween 1 and then goes on from there. So basically then, the killer, Michael Myers, has disappeared after having been shot 5 or 6 times, and fallen off the balcony by Dr. Loomis. And now Laurie Strode, played by Jamie Lee Curtis, is being drug off to the hospital. And the killer, still at large, will stalk the hospital, seeking her. And, that's pretty much all you need to know. People are trying to push Loomis out of the picture, and he ultimately refuses to be pushed aside because he's obsessed with his patient. And, you've got some minor spark of a love interest. One of these EMTs here, played by Lance Guest, Jimmy, is kind of into Laurie Strode. It's really not that important. It's not played up that big, which is a good idea. Now, it's a great idea to pick up right where they left off. That's good for a sequel. Usually it would be a few years later or something, and it wouldn't gel as well. Something like that. But they just have it be that it's still the same night. And that works very well. So, a lot of the movie is set in a hospital. Laurie Strode is brought to the hospital, as I said, and most of it happens during the night shift, where there's only 6, 7, 8 people working there. And the hospital works to some degree. I think it's a little too well lit, even after things start going bad there. So it's not as creepy as it could be. Deserted hospital sounds really creepy, and it works a bit, but it's not as effective as it could be. It's difficult to talk about this film. It's the second time I've seen it, and the first time I thought it was really, really impressive, that it was almost as good as the original. But the second time I've seen it now, it doesn't have the same staying power. Now, if it doesn't have the same staying power, that means it has some problems, that it doesn't work as well. Because the original held up. That whole point there about it not being as good the second time around, or just not being as good altogether. Look, it's a difficult movie to describe, because the bottom line is this. The same people worked on it. It's Deborah Hill and John Carpenter writing the screenplay, and pretty much the same lighting people and practical effects people and so on. It's most of the same team, with some minor changes here and there. Same actors. I mean, you've got Donald Pleasence, you've got Jamie Lee Curtis. You even have Cyphers, the sheriff. Yet it doesn't work as well. Why? Well, when the original Halloween came out in 1978, it was original. It was its own thing. And in 4 years between 1978 and 1981, a whole hell of a lot of imitators rose, like Friday the 13th. And they threw a lot of blood and gore on the screen. They did it in a way that was mostly disgusting, more than horrifying, more than terrifying. They were repulsing their audience more than creating fear and suspense. And this is exactly what Deborah Hill and John Carpenter said about this movie as they were making Halloween 2, that they wanted to make it about fear and suspense instead of repulsing an audience. But Carpenter ultimately went against his own ideas. He had Rick Rosenthal directing. He didn't want to direct. But he went back and changed some of Rosenthal's shots and altered a couple things. And one of them was to throw in a lot more blood and gore. He ended up imitating his own imitators. The original Halloween was almost bloodless and still worked. So by going back and throwing in a lot of blood and gore, but not in any particularly good way, it didn't create the same kind of fear, and it became like a lot of its imitators. I'm not saying blood and gore is a bad thing. I'm just saying that you have to do it right. And if you don't do it right, then it adds nothing to your story, and it just weakens your overall movie. Doesn't work as well, etc. And that's what happened here. I'm making it sound like it's a really terrible, terrible movie, but it's not. It's still pretty good. I say it's still better than a lot of the horror movies I've seen. And the thing is, though, in the original, you had Donald Pleasance doing the side plot where he's looking into some things to try to figure out where Michael Myers was. And he's doing the same thing here, but it's happening simultaneously with a lot of the bloodletting at the hospital. In the original, it was largely that he checked all these things out during the day and then he was on a vigil at the house. While in this one, he keeps, even while there are people being picked off the hospital, you keep interrupting that series of killings, those events, with Donald Pleasance as Dr. Loomis doing stuff. And it really distracts from that thread, while in the original, it was like he did his investigations and then he's on this vigil by the old Myers place, and then stuff just is happening to Laurie Strode and her friends. It's focused on there. It's focused, and you need focus when you're doing a horror film, when you're getting to the big thrilling part. And they didn't do that here well enough. So you'll have the hospital stuff being interrupted by these sorts of things with Dr. Loomis. They're a bit distracting. They weaken the story a bit. And they remind you, of course, like I was saying, that Jamie Lee Curtis is just not as important in this movie. And that really kind of weakens it a bit. Donald Pleasance and Jamie Lee Curtis are good in their roles, but the thing is, they're just not as important. I think it's not just that Jamie Lee Curtis isn't that important, it's that ultimately all these other secondary characters who are picked off are more important than them to some degree. That they kind of hog the spotlight a lot more, and that becomes problematic. Ultimately, it's a pretty strong story, though. Let's move on to the issue of fear. This movie, it has some parts that work, that are pretty intense or frightening, but a lot of it falls flat, like this here. This is the standard cliche. Here it comes. Oh no, a cat! There's always a cat jumping out of some place to scare people. It's a cliche, a horror movie cliche, and it shouldn't be in this movie. It shouldn't be in the successor of Halloween. So you've got quite a few jump scares like that, and you have visceral violence that is pretty intense but not particularly scary. Now, nonetheless, it has some scary moments that work pretty well, which is more than can be said of some horror movies. So let me call your attention to this. This is one of the security monitors showing Michael sneaking around the hospital looking for a way in. You'll see a point of view shot in a minute here. Rick Rosenthal does quite a few point of view shots. They don't work. They don't add much fear. There's a lot of kind of odd shots with Rosenthal, to be honest. You'll have the killer just kind of strolling through a scene in the background or something, and or you'll have like a scene where some characters are talking, and then there'll be Michael Myers on a security camera, or just they switch to him for like 10 seconds showing him wandering around somewhere else in the building, and they doesn't add anything to building suspense. It's not as good, but there's still things that work here. And the overarching story is still pretty strong, so there is some strength for this movie. And the last third in particular is very strong. Now, to fill time, while this shot gets to the point I wanted to mention, I'm just going to say that, yeah, Michael Myers uses a lot of ways, different ways to kill people in this. Unique ways, different weapons, etc. You know, syringe to the head or the eye, boiled someone alive with, in a kind of exploitative scene, certainly. Anyway, here we go. So you go from point of view shot to him nonchalantly wandering through the brightly lit hospital and back. Not as scary. What else? Well, the music is a bit obnoxious. It's kind of over the top. They took the original theme and kind of beefed it up, but now it's too loud. You want proof? Well, I got a scene for you that should work.
There is one survivor. 17-year-old Laurie Strode was found directly across the street from the home where the murders took place. The teenager was taken across town to Haddonfield Memorial Clinic.
So I find a lot of the updated music obnoxious, irritating compared to the original, a little too overpowering and all that. Maybe you like it. Just my take on it, though. And that pretty much brings us to the end. Now, you can see here that I gave the film a 6. Now, I've badmouthed the film a long while, but it does have some strength, as I tried to point out to some degree. The issue is, although it is a pretty good film, it is not as scary as the original by far. Now, that is why it ends up being a bit panned by me then, because it's okay as a film, but it's not a great horror film compared to the original. It's in the shadow of the original and its footsteps, and it doesn't live up to it. It comes closer than a lot of sequels do, but still. Which is why I only give it a 4 on the fear scale. Because although at times it works, at other times it fails miserably to create suspense, and throws in jump scares and so on to substitute. It doesn't work as well. A lot more blood and gore in this one, and they're in very diverse, creative new ways of killing people and all that. So since I was talking about music, because I wasn't exactly happy about the new music in Halloween 2, how about this as a question? What is the best scary movie theme or soundtrack? I would have to say, in my opinion, it's The Omen. In fact, in a way, as scary as The Omen is, it's like the movie itself holds back the soundtrack. It's like that terrifying soundtrack is beyond anything that any other horror movie could possibly do, that any horror movie could do. It's just really dead on. But there are other contenders. What do you think? There's a new little segment, an obscure question or point that will only make sense if you saw the movie or see it. It's a way of doing a spoiler without doing a spoiler, because you won't be able to figure out what I'm talking about unless you've seen it. When an elevator door is trying to close, if it meets any obstruction, it stops. It's a standard safety feature. So, what happened here? Wow, it makes it sound like someone got crushed in the door. That's not what happened. So until next time, this has been Reviews from Purgatory with J. Matt Wygant. Have a nice day.